of the New Atlantis, then you can look at the pillars that way, that this is a sign that we're talking about a New Atlantis. It's interesting because there was an alchemist, a Welsh alchemist, very famous alchemist called Thomas Vaughan. He was very influential in the 18th century, around the time that we're talking about. And he made a very strange pronouncement about America. And this is the first thing that it struck me when I was reading Thomas Vaughan. He said, "It is in nature as it is in religion. We are still hammering old elements, but seek not the America that lies beyond them." And I thought, how bizarre for someone like Thomas Vaughan, a very famous alchemist, someone who wrote about Kabbalah and the alchemy in particular, especially it might have been said biological alchemy, which is the rumor that's gone around that he knew something of certain physical practices that would lead to greater enlightenment or greater understanding. And here he is writing about America, which was not very well known when he was writing about it, and talking about America in a mystical sense. That as an alchemist, he is searching for the America that lies beyond the general chemical composition of material, the combination of metals. He says there's like a philosopher's stone. There's something more sacred beyond this, and we're calling it America.
Was he referring then to America, the nation, or is there something else from which that lend its name to this continent?
Well,
I mean, there have been questions for years as to where and how America actually got its name.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and if you believe the Amerigo Vespucci story, I have a bridge in Brooklyn I can sell you.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think when Vaughan was writing, he was using America in a metaphorical sense. Obviously he was. But I think he meant America. I think he saw America as this new Atlantis, as this promised land. And I think that he was making an equation between this new Atlantis and the philosopher's stone of alchemy, the stone that can change base metals into gold, the stone of transformation. And remember that Freemasonry calls each man a stone, a rough stone, the rough ashlar as they call it. And it's the purpose of Freemasonry to perfect that stone. So I think Thomas Vaughan was putting all of this together and seeing all of the connections there. Freemasonry as a kind of alchemy, a kind of a way to look for the philosopher's stone in each person, to transform that person to something higher, to a different element, a different metal.
Beyond the geometry of Washington, D.C., and the symbolism built into some of our federal buildings, what influence has Freemasonry had on the history of the United States?
Well, you may recall, I don't know if Dan Brown has covered this or not, because I have not yet read his book. I have a problem with Dan Brown. I'll go into that later. But it's a slight issue I have with him on certain things. But there was the famous Morgan affair. Mm-hmm. And the Morgan affair is a fascinating time. It's in the 19th century now. It's right after the War of 1812 is finished. And now there's this scandal that breaks out in upstate New York. And the scandal is that a man called William Morgan, he was a printer, and he was going to publish a book which would reveal the initiations of Freemasonry. The Freemasonic rituals would be published in his book. And the Masons objected to it. They tried to stop it. He insisted he was going to do it. He was a Freemason. I don't know if he was third degree, but he was at least first, if not second degree. And so he was going to publish the book. They tried to stop him. They had him arrested on some trumped-up charge. And then Morgan disappears. A bunch of guys show up at the prison. They wrestle him out of the jail. They take him in a stagecoach, and they disappear. Morgan is never heard from again. The rumor was he was killed by the Freemasons for daring to reveal their secrets. Well, we don't know that for sure. The body was never found. Okay, that turned into a cause célèbre. Out of that came the Anti-Masonic Party, mm-hmm. which was a real political party that ran candidates for president. John Quincy Adams was involved with the Anti-Masonic Party. So, we have these people who are saying, yes, we have to destroy Freemasonry as a cult. They're out there to control the world. Exactly what we're hearing today, mm-hmm. we were hearing then. And there was this tremendous upheaval. The Masonic lodges were forced to close all over the country. They were closing left and right. In New England, almost all the Masonic lodges closed in some of the states and did not open again for 50, 60 years. So there was this tremendous hysteria against Freemasonry. Okay. Well, William Morgan had a wife. I believe her name was Lucy. And William Morgan is basically pronounced dead. He doesn't show up for a number of years. She marries Joseph Smith, the founder of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
I did not know that.
Yes, she was one of his plural wives. Now, Joseph Smith, of course, was fascinated with Freemasonry. He joined the Masons. He became a third-degree Mason. And, of course, adopted many of the Masonic ritual ideas, implements, wardrobe, and everything into his own temple ceremonies, in the sacred temple ceremonies that are performed only in Mormon temples, that only you need special permission to be part of. And if anybody's been watching Big Love, I think in the last season they actually had a depiction of this particular temple ceremony, the endowment ceremony, as they call it. So there was this very strong connection between Joseph Smith and Mormonism and the Freemasons. He was initiating left and right. He was getting hundreds of people initiated into Freemasonry all at once when he was in Illinois, Indiana, and he was going out to the Midwest. He was initiating people. Eventually, as we know, Joseph Smith was arrested for treason or for sedition or whatever it was. He was in jail. Angry mob then goes to kill him. And according to tradition, according to the legend, he screams out towards the very end, "Will no one help the widow's son?" Mm-hmm. And this is a phrase that's used among Freemasons as a sign of distress.
Yeah, Dan Brown uses it, employs that as a plot device in his book. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the involvement of Mormonism with Masonry is very, very strong. And if you're asking about what the effect is today, well, that's one very major one.
Sure.
Another effect that I look at myself in Sinister Forces and other books that I like that I've written on Holy Alliance is the relationship between Scientology and occult secret societies, which had their basis in Freemasonry. So we have two religions, if you want to call Scientology religion, which I have my doubts about that, but so you have Scientology on the one hand, you have Mormonism on the other, and they're both stemming from Masonic sources and from occult practices. I mean, Joseph Smith was an occultist. Mm-hmm. There is no way to deny it. If you look at Joseph Smith's early history, how he received the plates on which the Mormon scriptures were written, he was involved in works of ritual magic. He was using books that were available at the time to conjure spirits. So it's a very weird, quintessentially American, phenomenon that we have occultists like L. Ron Hubbard was doing the same thing out in the desert in the Mojave, conjuring spirits, and there was, Joseph Smith 100 years earlier conjuring spirits in upstate New York, and both became involved with various types of Masonry, and created, American religious movements. It's a fascinating story, so we've been affected for that, not even mentioning presidents, vice presidents. FDR and Henry Wallace, we're off to the races on that story. Henry Wallace was very much involved in the occult, was very much involved in esoteric practices. I've come across a scholarly paper just recently that said, although Henry Wallace was demonstrably involved with occult societies and secret societies and mysticism, there's a possibility that FDR was involved even more than he was. And this is from an academic. This is from a scholarly paper that was written based on, what people had said about FDR and Wallace and other occultists that were in that circle around FDR. So there's been, a lot of Freemasons as presidents. Harry Truman, of course, Ford. Ford, right. These were all people who were Freemasons. FDR, of course, was a Freemason. So we have a lot of Freemasonry, and that may just be an American phenomenon. But I have more of a problem with Skull and Bones sometimes than I do with the Freemasons because those guys scare me. But
well, yeah, and we can go into that at some other time.
Sure.
Are there connections between other connections between Freemasonry and esoteric secret societies?
Well, sure. I mean, the Golden Dawn, which gave us virtually gave us the New Age movement with that and with the Theosophical Society in the end of the 19th century. You had Freemasons galore involved with this. I mean, you couldn't be a member of the Rosicrucian Society the SRIA, it was called in England, and also in the United States, unless you were a Freemason first. And out of the SRIA came the Golden Dawn. Out of the Golden Dawn came Aleister Crowley and all of the occult organizations that stemmed out of that. You had famous authors like Israel Regardie, Dion Fortune. Even William Butler Yeats, the Irish poet, was a member of the Golden Dawn. And this was a Masonic-type society whose founders were all Freemasons. You had Freemasonry involved in political movements in the Revolution, the French Revolution. There were Masonic societies that were involved in that, definitely involved in the French Revolution as well as in ours, and all sorts of stuff going on politically in Europe and the United States. So you had occult societies. They were involved with Rosicrucianism. They were involved with more pagan-type esoteric movements. But definitely there is this idea. I mean, in co-masonry, you have a kind of esoteric branch of that where they're involved in a more ritualistic and more magical approach to Freemasonry than the standard Freemason. So you have every kind of coloration.
Trying to get your mind around all of the various flavors is a real challenge.
Oh yeah.
What is the difference between all of them? Are there certain points of commonality, or are they just society at large? You've got people who may share a certain core set of ideals, but beyond that, it's a free for all. I mean,
well, it's from my point of view. One of the connecting tissues between them all is rituals of initiation. They all the groups that I've mentioned seem to share that fascination in common, that there must be a ritual of initiation. You can't simply join these groups and just hang out at the library, You have to be actively involved. And that doesn't mean raising money for a charity like the Shriners do, which is very commendable. Mm-hmm. It means becoming part of the group through ritual. There is this ritual element which binds the group together and which is supposed to improve the individual or raise them or give them new experiences, spiritual experiences. So you'll find that in the Golden Dawn, in the Rosicrucian societies, in the Freemasons, and all the various colorations out of that. I mean, Scientology started that way. Hubbard was involved in occultism and talked very glowingly about it until they shut him up on the subject, because he was going on saying that Aleister Crowley was a great friend of his. Of course, he never met Crowley, but he was starting to praise this type of thing until even then, they said, ixnay on the Oli cray, what I'm saying? Yeah. So then he dropped that out of his repertoire. But I mean, there was this occult, fascination and this idea of ritual initiation and this idea that you're connected to something that's ancient, that goes back all the way to the pyramids, that somehow there's a laying on of hands that started with Egypt 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years ago, and then moved its way up to the present time through all of these different channels, and that you're part of that movement. You're part of that esoteric knowledge. You're a channel for that energy, for that understanding, for that wisdom, for the sacred geometry, for instance. And it can only be done through initiation. And I think that's the connective tissue. Politically, you'll find them on all different sides. Mm-hmm. Politically, you'll find left-wing and right-wing Freemasons, if you will.
Sure.
I mean, you'll find them involved in political things overseas. When they sort of get out of hand a little bit and they start running riot, they start forming little clubs to talk about revolutionary ideas. Although you're not supposed to in a Masonic temple, it still happens. The Theosophical Society, of course, was very involved in revolutions in Asia. Blavatsky herself was involved as an espionage agent, running agents and running, ops in Afghanistan, Pakistan, mm-hmm. the places where we're all focused on today. So, I mean, it started there, and as I say, Henry Wallace, FDR, all those guys involved with Tibetan, Chinese, Russian groups and cults and gurus and leaders. It's all there. This idea that there is secret information, and this is where the paranoia comes in. This is why mm-hmm. we're so paranoid about Freemasons, because a Freemason feels or is brought to understand that there is secret information, there is special information, that only if you go through certain experiences will you be allowed to know what the secrets are. And I think that's at the core of all of this, the idea that you can have secret information. We have a fascination with James Bond and secret agents. Mm-hmm. An individual, one person shows up in a foreign country and has so much power they can overthrow a government, and kill Dr. No or Blofeld or any of those guys. And the odd thing is, the man who wrote those stories, Ian Fleming,
right,